Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Experience podcast, inside the business, buzz, and brilliance of Black entrepreneurs. Here is your host, Dr. Frances Richards.
What happens in Vegas goes all over the world on Black Entrepreneur Experience, episode number 464. Thank you for joining us as we elevate the Black Entrepreneur Experience by interviewing CEOs, thought leaders, innovative thinkers, and Black entrepreneurs across the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Richards. Imagine a sustainable luxury handbag made from PETA-approved vegan leather that comes from cactus. Our next guest is inventor and the founder of luxury handbag brand Levada. Welcome, Anita Thomas.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I've given our audience such a brief bio. Why don't you fill in the gaps? Share with our audience what you'd like them to know about you and your business.
Absolutely. So I am an entrepreneur located in Las Vegas, which I now call home for a period of 10 years. And I have been in the corporate space prior to transitioning and launching this business. So I'm a former or recovering corporate-aholic, I guess you could say, having spent a number of years in the higher education segment and in the sales and marketing arena, specifically within that industry. And I definitely am one of those creative individuals. So I wanted to be able to flourish in this part of my life and be able to really explore the ideas that I've had for so many years. I've had these ideas around interchangeable handbags. And especially as someone who's a former road warrior in sales, I used to travel a lot. When I say a lot, I mean living out of a suitcase, being on the road at least 4 days a week, having management responsibilities nationwide, and traveling to different conferences and accompanying sales individuals in visits with in-person clientele, and needing to always be on the go and to always be on, using air quotes, which means that you have to have a certain presence about you and appearance about you, but you're also running from function to function. And I found myself going from day to evening, having different types of activities mapped out. And then in the weekends, needing to have a different wardrobe for those types of personal events in your life, right? And so I found myself just always in this state of flux with my closet and with my belongings. And I've had these notions in my mind to do something with this and just didn't have the opportunity to really focus on it. And fast forward, there were some changes, some pretty significant changes that occurred in my life. Most significantly would be 2019. I lost 3 family members back to back in a span of 6 weeks, without exaggeration. And so I was in this whirlwind of getting another call, hauling off to another funeral, getting another call, hauling off to another funeral. So going between Atlanta and Tennessee and California, back to back again, 6 week span. And the third loss was actually someone that was very close in age. And that really shook me to my core. And I remember waking up once in the middle of the night and just thinking, what are you doing? Life is really, it's not a cliche. There are times that I think we're guilty of using cliches without really understanding the significance or the meaning behind it. And when I really came to understand that life is too short, and I had this, sort of staring me in the face, it triggers some things inside of you. And for me, it was this aha sort of awakening of, okay, what are you doing with this season of your life? And are you living your most authentic way? Are you showing up in the world the way that you've always imagined or want to? And if not, what are you going to do about it? Now that you've got this reminder, that's stirring you, what will you do about it? And so that was the first sort of impetus that caused me to stop and say, okay, it's one thing to say that you want to do something. It's another thing to actually put the wheels in motion and set forth in order to do that, right? And then fast forward the following year, the pandemic hit. And like so many millions of others, I found myself working from home, still working, fortunately, thank God. But it caused me to stop and look at my environment, to look at my lifestyle, to look at where I was trading my time. And I thought, if last year wasn't a wake up call, this year certainly is a bigger one. And so I really thought at that point, yeah, this something's got to adjust because there's something that's stirring in me that won't settle. I didn't get a peace about not doing the thing that kept reverberating. And I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, this rings true. There's something that sticks with you, and you think initially maybe it's a passing thought, or it's just an idea, or it's just a notion. And then when that thing doesn't let go and it keeps coming back and surfacing, that's when I think that there is really something there that needs to be explored. And I'll share this last thing because this was really the final straw. My mom was in town visiting, and it was nice for her to get away. And we had lost my grandmother. That was one of the losses that occurred. And I remember just sitting down, catching up over a cup of coffee or tea. And I said, hey, I want to pick your brain. My mom's, first of all, she's an extraordinary seamstress. She's an expert in her craft. She's even done bridal gowns. That goes to show you what level she's at, because most people that can sew a button cannot necessarily make a bridal gown. And a custom one at that. And so I wanted to get her expert opinion on this idea. I'm like, yeah, I want to try to fashion this handbag, but some elements of interchangeability. And from a construction standpoint, I wanted her input. And she gave me kind of a weird expression that I don't recall ever seeing on her face before. And she proceeded to answer the questions, but she was a little hesitant. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. I just thought, okay, maybe she's tired. And so the following evening, we're sitting out back, and she said, last night when you were asking me your questions about the handbags, I didn't say anything, but I've been playing around with different patterns for handbags myself for probably the last 10 years. And I was like, what's happening right now? Neither of us knew that we had these ideas or any notions or started tinkering. And it took that conversation to realize, okay, there's a mother-daughter thing that's happening. Neither of us were speaking of it. It was just like silently, there's this undercurrent. And then I was the first to articulate it. And then she fessed up. And that's when I knew that was the big, something's got to happen here moment for me. And that's when I launched Leveda, and I filed my business documents and got the LLC started and did the research to find credible manufacturers. There's a lot of digging and preparing the soil and building the foundation, as anyone knows, on this entrepreneurial journey. It's not just, okay, idea, launch. There's so many other things that happen. And then, of course, wanting to protect the intellectual component and working with an attorney for the patent process. That also is a huge step and a lot of legwork as well. So it's a long story, but at the end of the day, I guess the real takeaway is when you feel inspired, don't ignore it. And then when real significant alarms go off or triggers happen or reminders about life occur, really heed, sit still in that and allow yourself to really take in those lessons and guide you so that you're bringing your authentic self to the table, but you're also doing it from a space of knowing with certainty that this is the path for you. Because I think a lot of times what happens is we jump into things, we're not necessarily passionate about it, right? It's just, we think this notion of, I want to do something, I'm disgruntled or I'm unhappy in my current role, and you want to get out of that, it forces you to move in a certain direction, but it's not necessarily inspired direction, if that makes sense.
And my sincere sympathy for your loss.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Talk about the business end. What was the most costly lesson that you learned?
I would say for me, in going through the patent process, I didn't realize just how intense and involved it is. And so for my attorneys and myself, we went the path of both US filing and international, primarily because when working with manufacturers, there are very few left, sadly, in the United States that specialize in things like handbags and high-end bags. And so you find yourself needing to explore options internationally. For me, I got very fortunate because I did find some folks that were in LA, but that was only after kissing a few other frogs, unfortunately, and having to interview people and get samples from others and find out that they may say that they're US based, but they actually operate in India or China or, multiple other locations. And so you're dealing with individuals throughout the world, basically. Half of my products ended up being made in the US, and the other half were made offshore, but nearby in Mexico with some folks that actually transitioned from Italy and have a lot of experience working for luxury brands over there. So I was very fortunate to tap into that. But nonetheless, when you cross borders, things get murky fast relative to the laws and things that you can or cannot protect unless you have certain provisions in place. And so I wish I had known more thoroughly upfront what all of those considerations were, because then I may have made slightly different choices and said, well, if I'm going to launch, let me launch US stateside first and test the waters before expanding internationally. So those are some of the things I think doing your homework and really understanding, especially in a process that's very intricate and involved, what all of those moving parts are and being able to, withstand the financial resources that will be required. Fortunately for me, I thank God I was in a situation where I was able to power through, but certainly those are some considerations when you're looking at the startup costs for a business. Make sure that you take into account everything for your industry. And in particular, if there's some legal considerations, legal fees do start to creep and they can be significant depending on what you're working on.
Advice you wish you had followed?
I wish I had actually taken the leap of faith sooner, because I had heard in my life and with mentors even that you're the only one who needs to be accountable for making yourself happy at the end of the day. I would say I was guilty for so many years of being a people pleaser, partly by necessity, especially when you're in a type of role that's revenue generating and there's a bottom line and you're responsible for other people in a managerial capacity. Obviously, you've got multiple people that you've got to make happy at some point, and whether it's stakeholders, whether it's a board of directors, whomever, clients certainly first and foremost. And so I think not allowing myself to say, does this serve me any longer? Is this my true North Star? Right? Not having answered those questions for myself sooner, and unfortunately having waited for something as jolting as, back-to-back losses to sort of wake you up. That would be the thing. If there were a do-over, it would be to really sit in that space of awareness within myself to know who I am and what I want to do, as opposed to necessarily looking at what others' expectations were for me.
And Anita, what was that aha moment when you knew that your business was going to be successful?
For me, it had to be receptivity to the concept. And I'm going to go back even to that moment I had with my mom when she expressed that she also had similar ideas and that she had been noodling, with patterns. That's a rarity. Like that kismet, that divine spark, right? Those are rare things that happen. And for it to be my mother of all people, that we're obviously connected in different ways, but the realization that we have this kindred thing going on in this creative way, I think was my first thing, because I thought there is something here that is very unique. And the other thing I will say is looking around in my industry, not seeing this type of product. There are some others that are interchangeable in terms of handbags that are on the market. So I won't say that it's the only one that's available. It's the only one of its kind with a type of attachments. It's also the only one that is vegan, which is very important to me because I'm trying to reduce my carbon footprint and any negative environmental impact that I leave. I started a quest, several years ago, actually, with my own health and diet and things of that nature and changing, modifying the way that I eat. I had some health scares myself personally when it comes to regular checkups and getting scans and finding, thankfully, what turned out to be benign tumors. But is another wake up call, right? Those moments that you're faced with when you're not sure the outcome of a test, it forces you to stop and think and it forces you to stop and reevaluate. And so, birthing something that I think stays true to who we are and also helps to enlighten people along the way of, there are other options, there are other choices, or hey, look at what fashion is doing to the environment. Look at how much waste there is. Look at how much negative impact there is just based on carbon emissions and wastewater and toxic dyes. And once I started really doing a deep dive and learning and becoming more aware of the statistics, it really prompted me to want to do more to change. And then the other thing is there's literally only about 7% of the design population that is African American or minority. And so I think the other thing that helped me to understand that there's a winning solution here is the combination of all of those factors. Being a person that is part of an underrepresented population in this industry that's doing something innovative and using an innovative material really helped me to know that.
And is your mom working in the business?
She is my primary consultant. So, from a creative perspective, I lean on her quite a bit. I'm actually going to be visiting her in the next couple of weeks in California. So, I'll get a chance to pick her brain some more and we'll have a strategy session. So, she's, I wouldn't say a silent partner. She's certainly one of my strongest supporters, and she's someone that I can lean on for input anytime. She's technically retired as well, so she's not in a position where she wants to give up the freedom to work in a capacity. But I could certainly leverage her and use up like every minute of her free time. But she's living her best life, so I have to be respectful of that.
I want you to have a monologue and I want you to name this person, living or not, and they have really impacted your life, Anita. Who is that person and what are you saying to that person?
That is a great question. I don't want to keep saying my mom, my mom, my mom, and sound like a broken record or a cliche, but she certainly is the first and most influential person in my life, primarily because I was raised in a single parent household. Actually, it was my mom and my grandmother who raised me. And seeing the sacrifices that they made and watching the hustle. These are women who had gone through their own share of adversity. And when we relocated I was born in Tennessee, moved back to California after my parents separated. And shortly after that, my grandfather passed away. We lived with my grandparents. But then just seeing them in their resolve and doing everything that they knew to do in order to make ends meet. I'm technically the first in my family to graduate from college. I'm certainly not the only one now to have done so. But it's one of those things where you realize the foundation that was being laid for your life through the sacrifice and through the hard work of others who didn't have the same opportunities and who were just doing the absolute best that they could in the best ways that they knew how in order to ensure that the next generation would have more doors open for them. And that was never lost on me. And I think it's such a gift, looking back now, to be able to be in my grandmother's presence and to be tapped in with her siblings. She came from a large family. Actually, there were 12 kids in her family. And my great aunts and great uncles and people that just like instilled wisdom in my life, I carry that with me. And sometimes I still hear whispers and words of encouragement and recollections of times where there were new insights that I learned just by being still and attentive and listening and being a fly on the wall. And so that continues to shape me. definitely continues to shape me and keeps me accountable. It keeps me accountable because I know that life would be very different for me if I had lived in their era, right? If I were limited in the choices that they had and still had to come out on the other side and then figure out life. So it makes me want to press harder because I knew what those sacrifices were from the people that came before me.
Talk about your top two mentors and what lessons did they teach you?
A fantastic mentor, still do in my life, a woman that took me under her wing when I first got into the sales side of the business. And she is a no nonsense person. She hails from Trinidad originally and has the most glorious accent. I remember clients would even just say, just read anything, like read the phone book. I just want to keep hearing you talk. Her accent's so lovely. I remember one day we were having a conversation that was work related, and she pulled me aside basically and said, this is what you need to focus on. And the way that you're communicating things, it's almost as if you're asking the permission from these folks in this team to do X, Y, and Z for you. No, this is your role. You're the one that needs to tell them what needs to happen. And she gave me permission to own my authority. And it was the first time, I think, ever that anyone articulated something to me in such a way that made it very clear that I need to ask and basically demand for what I want, not in a rude way, not in a way that would be off-putting, but to be very matter of fact and to be very clear when communicating. This is what you need, this is what is expected, this is what the client is wanting us to do, these are the things that I need you to execute on. And it really helped shape me in terms of my leadership path and the direction of my communication. And she's still a dear friend to this day. I love her, and she's a very integral part of my life, someone that's also in California. But it really sort of woke me up in a way that no one else had done prior. And so the lessons that I took away from her, not only in that moment, but in so many subsequent others, still, I think of her in some of the decisions that I'm making day to day. And so it really, she made a huge impact. Another individual that made a huge impact is the person that actually is responsible for bringing me to Las Vegas. And it's someone that I had worked with for a number of years, and then he became my boss. And he is a similar person, very different background, but he's someone who just, he lives in a state of faith, I would say, like unabashedly goes for what he wants and has been a rock solid champion for me in helping to open doors. And I think with that, what I would say that I saw in both of these individuals is people who were true sponsors for me. They mentored, they coached along the way, but they also were thankfully in a position where they could help usher me into the next step of my journey. Because there are people who mentor you, and then there are people who can also do certain things on your behalf. And I count myself fortunate to have a lot of mentors and people that I've learned from. But the shorter list is the people that also are in a position who can do and execute certain things that will help you in a tremendous way. And so those two people do come to mind for me.
Advice you wish you had followed?
Some of the advice that I wish I had followed is you learn through the process. I was guilty for so long of thinking I have to have everything figured out before taking the steps. And it didn't really resonate until I did sort of shift that mindset away from that to everyone that you look at that you think has it figured out, they're doing everything, they're learning as they go in some cases. There's foundational things that, yes, people know X, Y, or Z. But when it comes to actually in this entrepreneurial journey, executing and getting everything done, at the end of the day, everyone is encountered new challenges. And when those challenges come up, you have to deal with it. You have to put out fires. You're learning through the experiences that your business is teaching you or your clients are teaching you. Look, in 2020, 2021, no one would have foreseen the pandemic, right? And we had to think of different ways to get things done. In some cases, businesses had to pivot in a way that they never expected. The work from home policies had to change. A lot of businesses now are doing hybrid. That's a new thing because a new experience in the world, came about. And so you're adjusting, you're pivoting, you're always having to deal with triage at some point. And it's no different when it comes to decision making. Some things are pretty straightforward, and other things you may have to get creative to figure it out. But at the end of the day, move forward without the feeling of overwhelm that you have to know everything, because you're never going to know it all. And by the time you get out there, someone else, can come along and try to leapfrog you. So execution beats certainty in some cases. And that's a hard lesson to learn when you're a control freak and a type A personality. But, there is beauty in letting go of the unknowns as well.
Let's talk about raising capital. How did you raise capital to start your business?
For me, fortunately, I was able to do the bulk of it myself without having to tap into any resources. And then I did a pre-sale event, which is sort of a VIP friends and family type of event. And I did a webinar introducing everyone to my concept and showed them the prototype and explained what I was up to in this new chapter of my life, and got some support that way in order to get some early sales in the door. And that helped with the manufacturing and getting the product out to market. And so I was very fortunate to be able to tap into my network in order to do that and get me some initial momentum into the business. There will come a time, I believe, where I may have to tap into another source of capital with expansion and scaling. But for my story, fortunately, I was able to shoulder quite a bit personally and then again go through the pre-sales event.
And if someone is interested in purchasing a bag, a handbag, a luxury handbag, how would they do so?
You can visit my website, which is lavadabags.com. That's LAVABAGS.com.
And your bags, you're selling them online. All of them are it's an e-commerce. It's not a brick and mortar store.
That is correct. Yes.
Thank you for that. What is something we as consumers don't know about the luxury handbag industry that we should know?
That is a great question. I think a lot of times when people think of luxury handbags, they think of, the markups and just how expensive it is. And I will say, having worked very, very closely to the people that produce them and have to do the intricate work of developing them, that there is a lot that goes into it. And when you're talking luxury, you're looking at not just a brand name and the label that's associated with it, but you have to take into account the quality of the materials that are used, the craftsmanship, etc. For me, my bags are all handcrafted. And so there is a lot more work that's involved because A, the product is more intricate. B, it's not based on the use of this giant machinery where everything's going through like an assembly line. When that happens, typically, and we see this in clothing, we see it in bags, it usually means that the materials that are used are also of a lesser quality, everything down to the thread, the fabrics itself, the thread, the notions, any of the buttons, snaps, anything that you can think of that are used on lower quality items are certainly far, far, far less expensive, but they're also higher or more prone to breakage. When you get into the luxury class, you're getting the materials that are much higher quality, and you're getting into a lot more attention to detail and a lot more handcrafting. And those processes take time and they're more resource intensive. And so that does drive up the cost. Now, I will say that having been said, there is still a good amount of paying for the logo, paying for the brand name, paying for name recognition, right? Levada is not in that category right now, and I don't foresee that that will be the case for us. We try to keep our price point relatively affordable, even within the higher end of the range, but we're also giving people a lot more for the money. So with our product, it's a 4-in-1. So you can style your bag on its own, the base bag, or you can add an overlay, you can change the belt, you can change the cover, you can manipulate it in different ways so that you're getting more mileage out of the bag. And that's important to me as a person that's into sustainability. But I will say that what people may not realize is you're looking at the craftsmanship, you're looking at the quality of the materials that are used, you're looking at the resources, time to fashion all of that and put it together. And that does drive up the costs. Depending on the label, you're also paying, frankly, for that brand name. That part is true in some cases, especially when you get into the thousands of dollars of these luxury items. And so that's the consideration and the question that you have to ask is if that cachet, that brand name cachet is important enough to you to buy that. And if that's something that you've had your heart on for a while and you've worked hard and that's your reward, then by all means, go for it. But just know that those are all of the considerations that need to be factored.
What's your ideal client?
Great question. My ideal client is someone who likes to look pulled together, but on their own terms, has an individual sensibility in terms of style, also wants to support the idea of environmentalism and doing our part in order to have a greener closet and ultimately a greener world without all of the waste. I don't say that I am a vegan because technically I still do eat fish, and so I'm a pescatarian, so I'm not going to be a hypocrite. While I don't consume traditional meats anymore, and I understand that that is a health conversation and it's personal for each individual, I do know that there's an agricultural impact, there's a greenhouse emission impact with the cattle industry. And when it comes to fashion, fashion is very guilty of being one of the top pollutants in the world, number 2, in fact, in terms of greenhouse emissions. And so we have to stop and take a step back and say, what are we doing to further create this impact on the planet, right? And for me, my ideal client is someone who is taking those things into account and understands that there are options today. We didn't have as many options before when it comes to choice of materials, but the leather goods world has evolved. And so plant-based materials are very viable and very competitive to leather. And it's, to be clear, it's not pleather. This is not plastic. This is a very different material that is polymer based and is sustainable and biodegradable. And yet it's treated in such a way that it has durability and longevity. And so for people who are interested in impact and amplifying their, carbon footprint, I think being very conscious of that, those are the type of people that we try to appeal to.
Anita, what is your zone of genius?
Another great question. I love these questions. I would say my zone of genius is really thinking outside the box. I am a very innovative thinker, and I pride myself on, and I have been told this as well, that I am not in any particular lane that looks at things just in a traditional sense. I have traditional sensibilities, but being able to come at things from an angle that maybe isn't always apparent on the surface level is sort of a secret sauce of mine. And that allows me to apply that sort of sensitivity to design elements, as well as just looking at how to serve people differently and better. So, yeah, I would say that would be my zone of genius.
Talk about legacy. When it's all said and done, how do you want to be remembered?
I hope that my epitaph will speak that I cared. I cared about the people that I served. I cared enough to put something out in the world that would allow future generations to benefit, that I'm building a legacy for wealth creation in my family. All of what I'm doing now is actually helping to fill or to build that foundation, working even with my mother in a consulting capacity. It helps to create something that we can later turn over to other people in the family and nieces and whatnot, and leaving a legacy that has a financial component to it is of huge importance to me, especially coming from a background where you count every penny, every half penny, right? When you get to a certain point in your life where you're able to start doing for others, when you can become a philanthropist, when you can give charitably, but when you also realize that the responsibility is on you to teach others and to help them also grow that garden for themselves, I don't think there is any greater legacy than to leave anything behind that can be self-sustaining. And so that is what I hope that my legacy is that people say, she planted the seeds and watered them and had enough growth so that we could continue to feed and then continue to propagate after that.
Let's talk about mental wellness and managing a business.
Ooh, such a near and dear topic. I had to, when you said the word, something inside, just like it evoked something in me, because balance and seeking balance, I think we've heard this a million times almost as a cliche. You have to try to find work-life balance. And there's so much controversy about that, because most people will say, when you're running a business, you're starting a business, there really isn't such a thing as balance, because you're all in, your head down, you're trying to get it done. But we know that you will burn yourself out rather quickly trying to go at such a frenetic pace. And look, at the end of the day, especially when you're primarily a one person show, your name is in every box on the org chart, right? You, you're the founder, the CEO, but you're also the marketing person, your sales, your IT, you're the mailroom, you're all of the things, right? And so you can't necessarily delegate to a team of 50 or however many people. You're doing a lot. And so you have to find time to nurture yourself physically. And physical health is mental health, right? Because your body works as a well-oiled and unified machine. And so nurturing your temple is a huge part of mental health. I'm a firm advocate that there is a food and physical activity correlation and relationship to our brain health. And I don't take it lightly, because in my family, we do have a history of degenerative brain disease, including dementia and Alzheimer's, early onset Alzheimer's. I've seen it too many times to mention. And I have learned and have taken the time to try and educate myself to as great an extent as possible, understanding the linkages between certain foods and degenerative brain health, and certain foods and inflammation in the body. And inflammation, by the way, has a direct correlation to things like dementia and Alzheimer's, and eating excessive carbs, for example, and things that are prone to make our bodies go into this bloat state have a negative impact on our mental health, right? Lack of activity, lack of physical movement, poor food choices, or things that are highly processed and chemically laden, these things have an impact on our mental well-being. And so I'm the type of person who believes that you should start your day in whatever physical and mental health practice makes sense for you. For me personally, that means getting up and moving. It means drinking water before I drink coffee. It means being still and having my prayer and meditation time. It certainly means trying to get in some, steps and doing a good workout as well. Because if you don't take care of you and you're the engine behind your machine, you won't have a machine, yet alone a business, right? And so we have to put ourselves first. And there's no stigma attached to that, right? You have to be the person that you've always imagined yourself to be, just as you would have a vision for your business, right? And so mental health boils down to being selfish, if I can use that word. And that word gets a negative connotation so many times, but selfishness just means self-care. And no one's going to care about you more than you. You have to put yourself as a priority. And I'm going to say this until like I'm blue in the face, but I'll shout it from the rooftops. If we do not care about ourselves, there is nothing left to give. We can't pour out into other people's lives. We cannot pour out for our businesses. And then we'll feel depleted and we'll start to resent other people. We'll start to resent the very thing that we're working on, that we say that we are passionate about, that we want, to do good in this world, and we want our business to stand for all of these wonderful things. We'll start to resent it because we see less and less of ourselves getting nourished. So it starts there. We have to reverse it. I'm so passionate about this because I've been guilty in the past of putting other people's priorities in front of my own, and having to get to that point of burnout and self-deprecation until I realized that I had everything backwards, and that it's not selfish for me to take care of myself, that is the source from which anything good that I have to offer flows. It starts with me loving me, and it starts with me taking care of me. And then from there, I can act, I can proceed, I can do, right? And so I think mental health starts with physical health and permission to really be kind to oneself and put yourself first.
Anita, if you conducted this interview, what is the one question you would have asked yourself? I want you to ask the question and answer it.
That's a great question. Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years, or what do you see for your business in the next 5 years? And my response to that question would be that my company is a household name, and that I have presence in the top retail stores throughout the country. I do want to evolve the brand, and I want to ensure that there is a product offering that people can get exposed to if they hadn't had the opportunity to visit my website or do, shopping online. I would love to see the expansion of the number of designers in the space, and particularly in the luxury and the high end world, to be much more representative than it is today. And, I want Leveda to occupy that space. I want Leveda to be top of mind for people when they're thinking of what their options are, certainly in handbags, but in the future in some of the sustainable clothing options that I also plan to launch.
Thank you. We've come to the part of our interview. It's called Rapid Round of Fun. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you to give me very quick answers. If there's something you desire not to answer, feel free to say pass. Are you ready for the Rapid Round of Fun?
Yeah.
Your favorite comfort food?
Popcorn.
You relax doing what?
Reading.
The last movie you saw?
American Fiction.
Your favorite singer or rapper?
Ella Fitzgerald.
Your favorite dance song?
Probably Happy by Pharrell Williams.
What food you eat every week, no matter what?
Hell.
Your ideal car?
Ooh, I'm going to pass because I don't have an easy answer on that one.
Work out or hit the couch?
Work out.
Anita Thomas, thank you so much for joining us on Black Entrepreneur Experience Podcast. Before we let you go, share with our audience the best way for them to connect with you and do business with you, and feel free to leave all your social media handles.
You can find me online at www.lavadabags.com. That's LAVABAGS.com. And from there, you can connect with me. There's a contact link in the footer. So I would love if you have just questions about the products or anything like that, reach out. Or if you just want to say, hey, I enjoyed your interview with Dr. Richards, I'd love to hear that feedback as well. And you can find social links on the website as well.
Thank you, Anita. That's a wrap.
Thank you for listening and subscribing to Black Entrepreneur Experience. We would love for you to leave a review and rating on iTunes and share with your friends. For show notes and more episodes, go to www.beepodcast.com. Join us next Wednesday, and remember, green is the new black. So keep your bank accounts and your business in the black.